I've been diagnosed. Stage 4. I didn't cry when I said it. My voice stayed level, almost too calm. One by one, I made the calls. Caleb picked up. First tight voice, heavy silence. Tessa said all the right things fast and clipped, like she was reciting a sympathy script. Nolan took the longest to answer, but when he finally did, he promised to book a flight that night. By sunset the next day, they were all home. The driveway looked like it used to on Thanksgiving cars, lined up doors, slamming voices echoing through the yard. For a second, I let myself pretend. They hugged me, kissed my cheek, told me I looked stronger than expected. Then the questions started. Do you have a will? Mom, is the title of the house clear? What about the land plot out back? Has it been appraised? I made tea while they talked. Tessa opened her tablet, started typing notes. Caleb paced while muttering about maintenance costs. Nolan pulled out a measuring tape. He said it was to check if the back fence had shifted, but he was really just sizing up the property. No one asked how I felt. They filled the silence with concern, but it wasn't concern for me. It was for what I might leave behind, and how cleanly they could divide it. I watched from my chair while Tessa suggested adjusting my power of attorney, just in case. They didn't notice I hadn't touched my tea. They didn't see the bruise on my arm from where I fell last week. The house felt smaller with them in it, not warmer. After dinner, I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. I sat at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, and stared at the contact I hadn't opened in years. Next evening, Tessa walked in with a bouquet that looked expensive and a notepad tucked under her arm. She kissed my cheek, then started listing things we needed to handle sooner rather than later. Caleb followed her in, already talking about roofing estimates and resale value. Nolan stayed outside a little longer, circling the property like a surveyor. Hands in his pockets, eyes scanning everything but me. They rotated in and out of the kitchen, each with a mug of coffee, each making sure to ask how I was holding up, before pivoting back to logistics. It was like I'd become a project, a file to organize, something finite. Tessa knelt beside the bookshelf at one point, fingers tracing the spines of my husband's old encyclopedias. Some of this could probably go, she murmured almost to herself. It's too dated to donate. Caleb stepped in, then pointing at the antique desk in the corner. You know this might be worth something. We should have someone look at it before anything happens. I sat in the armchair and folded my hands, the tea cooling beside me. Later, I heard Tessa on the phone in the hallway. Yeah, I'm not sure if she even has a trust set up. If it's just a will, things get messy. No, the house isn't in anyone's name yet. That's the problem. I leaned back and looked out the window. The wind moved through the birch trees. I let the voices blur in the background. The talk of documents, signatures, and contingencies. My phone buzzed in my lap. An old message thread untouched for 6 years. Still sitting there like a bruise. I opened it, hesitated, and typed, Your brothers are here. So is Tessa. I told them. They're already asking about the house. Then a pause. My fingers hovered, heart louder than the room. I'd like to see you. I didn't wait for a reply. I just put the phone down and turned off the hallway light. Then I sat in the dark, listening to my children divide what wasn't theirs yet. At 2:13 a.m., I saw the porch light flicker on through the crack beneath my door. I thought it was the motion sensor, maybe a stray cat, or one of the boys stepping out for a smoke. But something pulled me from the bed. I walked slowly to the front of the house. Through the window pane, I saw her. Wren. No suitcase. No umbrella. Just a sweatshirt, damp sleeves, and the same look she used to have when she scraped her knee as a child, too proud to cry, too tired to keep standing. I opened the door without a word. I heard, she said. From Aunt Geneva. I stepped aside. The hallway light hummed as she passed through, pausing only to glance at the family photos. She didn't ask where to sleep, didn't ask if it was okay. She walked straight to the kitchen, opened the bread box like she never left, and made toast. We didn't mention the last time we saw each other. The slammed door, the sharp words, the years that followed, each one heavier than the last. She buttered the toast and made a second slice, then poured us both a glass of water. We sat in the quiet, the kitchen light casting soft shadows on the wall. She didn't ask how sick I was. She just looked at me. Really looked. After a while, I slid my glass a little closer to hers, a gesture small enough not to break the moment. She said, "I thought you'd never want to see me again." I answered, "I never said that." She nodded, lips pressed together. And we sat like that until the clock said 3. By morning, she was sweeping the back steps. By noon, she'd mended the torn curtain in the guest room. Not because I asked her to, because something in her needed to. That evening, Tessa came into the kitchen and froze when she saw Wren standing at the sink. Wren didn't flinch. She just rinsed another glass and reached for the towel. By the second morning, the house felt different. Not quieter, just tighter, like every room was holding its breath. Caleb watched Wren from the doorway as she folded the blankets in the den. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "She's just here to guilt-trip us," he muttered, as if Wren couldn't hear him. As if I couldn't. Tessa tried to smooth things over with her bright voice and perfect posture. But even she couldn't hide the way her gaze kept moving between me and the kitchen cabinets, as though something valuable might suddenly appear there. Nolan stayed outside most of the day, pretending to check gutters and siding, but really circling, like someone searching for an angle. I sat on the couch, hands folded, listening to them circle the topic they wanted to reach control. They all had their strategies. Tessa with her organization apps, Caleb with his talk about planning ahead, Nolan with his quiet calculations. They were jostling for position without ever saying the words aloud. When dinner came, Tessa waited until I'd taken a few bites before sliding a folder across the table. "Mom," she said lightly, "this is just a guardianship form. Pre-filled so you're not overwhelmed. It gives one of us the ability to help manage things. Nothing binding unless you sign." The table fell silent. Caleb watched my reaction. Nolan didn't look up. I smoothed the edge of the paper with my thumb, then pushed it gently back to her. "Not tonight," I said. Tessa's smile tightened. Caleb cleared his throat. Nolan scraped his fork a little too loudly. When the plates were cleared, everyone scattered except Wren. She stood up first, gathered dishes, and turned on the faucet. I rose to help her. We washed in silence, passing plates and towels like we used to when she was a teenager. I could feel the tension of the others lingering in the doorway, waiting to see if I'd scold her, thank her, or push her away. But I just kept washing, and she kept drying the rhythm, settling between us in a way nothing else had managed to yet. When the last dish was done, I shut off the faucet, wiped my hands, and walked to the back door with the decision already forming in my mind. The next evening, after the others had driven into town for errands they didn't really need, I walked out to the shed behind the house. Wren followed without question. I hadn't been out there in years, not since Harold passed. The lock was stiff, the hinges groaned, but the smell inside was the same old paper. Faint, oiled dry wood. I pulled the string light, but it flickered once and went dark. Wren switched on the flashlight from her phone. We moved slowly past the clutter, an old wheelbarrow, a box of bulbs that never made it into the soil, and I bent down beside a crate pushed against the far wall. Inside were manila folders marked in faded ink, tax returns from the 90s, scanned copies of land purchases, receipts for repairs no one remembered. I set them on a workbench one by one. Beneath them, the fireproof lockbox sat exactly where Harold had left it. Still locked, still heavy. Wren didn't touch anything until I nodded. She opened a file and started sorting, careful, deliberate. Titles, dates, property lines. I thought you didn't want anything, I said after a while. My voice cracked more than I expected. I still don't, she answered without looking up. But I want you to have your say before they speak for you. I stared at her. Then the quiet set of her face, the calm with which she handled paper after paper. She wasn't staking a claim. She was giving me back control. We stayed out there until past midnight, our hands dusty, our backs aching. She made a pile labeled Keep and another labeled Talk to Lyle. That was my lawyer, someone she remembered even after all these years. When I closed the lockbox again, my breath came easier. Like something I'd been holding in for far too long had finally slipped out into the air. At dawn, Wren made coffee and sat beside me on the porch swing. I dialed Lyle's number with one hand and held her wrist with the other, steadying us both. By noon, the call was finished, and the others still hadn't noticed a thing. Dr. Hensley came by mid-morning carrying his usual brown leather bag and a clipboard worn thin at the edges. He checked my vitals in the front room with the shades drawn. I told him I was tired, and he nodded without much surprise. He asked if I'd been eating, and I told the truth some days. Yes, some days no. I saw Tessa, standing halfway down the hallway, pretending to look at the bookshelf while listening in. I let my voice carry just enough when he read off the lab results. My white blood count had dropped again. He looked at me gently. I didn't blink. She's weaker than I thought I heard Tessa whisper. Later in the kitchen, her voice tight with something that almost sounded like worry, but not quite. That evening, Caleb leaned against the wall near the stairs phone to his ear. He told his wife the insulation in the attic looked rough, and if anything happened to me over winter, they'd need to act fast. Nolan, always quieter, brought me a box from the hall closet and said he'd be happy to start sorting out old paperwork if I needed the help. I thanked him without smiling. Wren stayed out of those conversations. She reheated leftover soup, brought it to me in my favorite green bowl, and sat across the room with her knees pulled up, reading a gardening book from the shelf. She didn't ask about the doctor. She didn't comment on the sound of whispering behind doors. She just watched me like she was memorizing how I breathed. The others hovered near the corners of the house like furniture assessors pausing too long at framed certificates, opening drawers that weren't theirs to open. I watched them watch everything but me. After dinner, I pretended to be asleep in the armchair while Caleb and Nolan whispered about appraisers and long-term property tax. They didn't notice Wren standing just down the hallway, arms crossed, listening too. When their voices faded, she came over, took the empty bowl from my lap, and placed a small folded napkin in my hand. On it was a note. They don't see you, but I do. The morning after the doctor left, I opened the drawer in the hallway desk and pulled out a legal pad I hadn't touched in years. My handwriting was slower than it used to be, but the words came steady. I addressed the letter to the Hospice Foundation in town, the same one that had helped Harold in his final months. I told them half my savings would go to their expansion wing. Not as a gift, but as repayment. Quiet people need quiet places to say goodbye. The rest I wasn't quite ready to say. But I knew. I walked into the guest room later that afternoon, the one that had always stayed closed. The walls were bare, the old dresser empty. The light fell in softly from the east window. I stood there and imagined spring Wren pulling up weeds, laying down mulch, laughing at squirrels in the birdbath. She'd always loved growing things even when she pretended not to. I could see her hands in the soil sleeves, pushed up, humming to herself, like her father used to. That evening, the house felt still. The others had gone to dinner without asking if I wanted to come. I didn't mind. I didn't want to pretend to smile. Wren knocked once and stepped inside my room. She didn't bring tea or soup, just herself. She sat at the foot of the bed like she used to when she had nightmares as a child. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "For the shouting. For what I said. For leaving like that." I reached out and took her hand. It was cold and shaking. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for not stopping you. For thinking time would fix it without words." She leaned her head against my knee. I ran my fingers through her hair like I hadn't in decades. We didn't speak after that. The silence was softer now, no longer something to fear. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't need to. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the light on the porch was still glowing, and Wren had already started boiling water in the kitchen. By Friday morning, the suitcases were lined up by the front door. Nolan said his flight had been rescheduled, though I hadn't heard him on the phone. Tessa mentioned a real estate seminar she couldn't miss, and Caleb promised to check in once things settled. They each hugged me goodbye with brisk, polite arms. Tessa kissed my cheek and told me to stay strong. Caleb reminded me to lock the back gate. Nolan didn't say much at all. His eyes swept the living room one last time before he stepped outside. I watched them go one by one like they were leaving a hotel room. No backward glances. No hesitation. Wren didn't pack. She stayed in her flannel shirt, her hair tied back with a faded bandana. She refilled the bird feeder without being asked. She paid the electric bill and left the receipt on the counter. She did the laundry. She fixed the loose drawer in the hallway without saying a word about it. She simply remained. That afternoon, I sat in my bedroom with the window cracked just enough to let in the breeze. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope. Heavy paper. Thick seal. It had taken weeks to finalize with Lyle, but I knew every word by heart now. Final copy was written in my handwriting across the front. I walked out to the porch, found Wren on the swing with a bowl of cherries in her lap, and held the envelope toward her. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. She just took it gently, placed it beside her on the cushion, and looked at me. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me come home." I sat beside her, and we watched the sky shift above the trees. We didn't talk about what was inside the envelope. She wouldn't open it that day. Maybe not for many days, and that was fine. Later that evening, she lit the porch lamp. I watched her from the kitchen window as she placed her hand on the railing as if grounding herself there, right where she'd always belonged. I spent more hours in bed than out of it now. The mornings felt heavier, the afternoons shorter. But I didn't dread the slowness. I let it come. Wren walked the dog most mornings, even when the wind picked up. The neighbors waved at her, some out of habit, some out of surprise. She never corrected them when they called her by name, never looked embarrassed when they said, "You're back for good, aren't you?" I watched from the window. Sometimes head propped on pillows, the old quilt tucked up to my chin. Her steps looked lighter than when she arrived, like the house had started breathing for her again. One evening, she stood on the little stool by the window in the den, pinning up new curtains she'd found in the back of the linen closet. Pale ones, with small, stitched patterns you wouldn't notice unless you looked closely. "I know you like light," she said, smoothing the folds. I whispered, "I like that you remembered." She didn't turn around right away, but I saw her shoulders lift with a breath. In my dresser drawer beneath my nightgowns and hand creams was the signed will. Not hidden. Just waiting. The envelope was thick, the pages notarized, the signatures crisp. The house was hers now. The rest, the savings, the investments, the plots of land, would go where they were needed. Hospice, the local library, a women's shelter I'd donated to for years in secret. It wasn't about being generous. It was about giving things back to the world that had given me Wren again. Late that night, I heard her moving through the kitchen, checking the locks, turning off lights. Her footsteps had the rhythm of someone who belonged. I closed my eyes and let her sounds lull me to sleep, drawer, faucet switch, each a quiet promise that something would remain after I was gone. And the next morning, I opened my eyes to soft light filtering through the new curtains and the smell of coffee wafting in from the hall. I woke with the windows open, the morning light spilling across the foot of the bed. The air was cool and soft, the kind that smells like something new beginning. My bones ached a little more than usual, but there was no heaviness in my chest. No dread. Wren brought in a cup of coffee, not too hot, with just a splash of cream. How I liked it when my hands weren't steady enough for pouring. She didn't hover or fuss. She just sat at the edge of the bed, sipping hers in silence, letting the day arrive between us. We'd finished the will. The phone barely rang anymore. Tessa sent a message now and then. Nolan forwarded a link about long-term care insurance. Caleb asked how I was feeling with 2 thumbs-up emojis. I told them I was resting. That was mostly true. But I didn't feel like dying. I felt like being still, like watching things grow. That afternoon, Wren brought out the tomato seedlings. She'd picked them up the week before without saying a word. She just laid them out in rows by the back fence and asked if I had a spot in mind. I pointed toward the kitchen window. There, so I can see them while I eat. She smiled. Then that's where they'll go. I sat in the old patio chair wrapped in my cardigan, a straw hat resting low over my eyes. Wren knelt in the soil, pressing each root into the earth like it mattered. She talked softly while she worked about how tomatoes need room, how they'll lean toward the light if you let them. I nodded. I knew something about that. Later, she brought out a notebook and jotted down which ones had taken best to the soil. I leaned back warm from the sun and closed my eyes for a while. The house didn't feel like something I was leaving anymore. It felt like something we'd returned to together. And when I opened my eyes again, Wren was still there. Her hands in the dirt. Her heart steady, her gaze fixed on something growing.